Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, we'll explore the Wisconsin connection in superstar Bad Bunny's latest album. Then we'll talk to the founder of the Milwaukee Comedy Festival about our local comedy scene.
There's all those tiny little things that make Milwaukee a little bit different, and I think that's why you're going to get a unique flavor in the festival, not just because we have comics from all over, but because we have this incredible talent pool here in the city already.
Plus, we'll learn how northern Wisconsin's history of logging inspired the world of timber sports.
There becomes a lot of nostalgia for that work, and by the 1930s and 40s, there start being these fairs with reenactments, and that's where you start seeing timber sports really take off.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us. The NFL recently announced that Puerto Rican rapper and singer Bad Bunny will headline next year's Super Bowl halftime show. Bad Bunny's sixth studio album, Debí Tirar Más Fotos, was released earlier this year to rave reviews, in part because of the weaving of Puerto Rico's history, politics, and diaspora throughout the album. Bad Bunny had help from a UW-Madison assistant professor. Joel Melendez-Badillo created 17 brief visual history lessons for the songs, which are now on YouTube. WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez talked to Melendez-Badillo about how the collaboration happened and what history Bad Bunny wanted to share about Puerto Rico.
I feel like every Puerto Rican I know is a Bad Bunny fan, as well as the whole world at this point. What about Bad Bunny, the music, the artistry, really kind of appeals to you in both a historical way and a scholarly way?
I guess I'll start by saying that I have this colleague, Yarimar Bonilla, who teaches at Princeton, and I read that she once said that Bad Bunny was like that primo, that cousin that mated. And so everyone in Puerto Rico is proud of having that cousin that is on a global stage. So I think there's a sense of Benito belonging to us. Now, on a more academic side, I think that, the Bad Bunny phenomenon is super interesting to me because I think there's a before and after Benito. He broke all the rules in the genre when he came out. Reggaeton was a hyper masculine, macho sort of aesthetic, and then he started painting his nails. He sort of queered reggaeton in a way. Also, he got to this global platform speaking Spanish and not losing that. So I think it's that Benito marks a turning point. In fact, my book, Puerto Rico National History, is a history of Puerto Rico from pre-Columbian times to Bad Bunny, because I think that the Bad Bunny phenomenon is so fascinating. And the book that I have a chapter on with Professor Santiago Ortiz is called The Bad Bunny Enigma. And it's a bunch of scholars just trying to grapple with this question that you just posed. What is it about Bad Bunny that is so fascinating, right?
Right. And your work together covers 500 years of history, from pre-Columbian history to current day. And I want to kind of get into that collaborative process, because the end product, which you can see online, which is these kind of explainers of Puerto Rican history, little snapshots of Puerto Rican history on Bad Bunny's YouTube page. How did that all come together, and how did you all decide what history you would dig into?
So the mandate was basically that they wanted history, or Benito wanted history to accompany the visualizers in YouTube. And so at first I thought it was niche sort of Puerto Rican history, unknown Puerto Rican history. But Benito came back and said, part of the problem is that any history of Puerto Rico is unknown, even to Puerto Ricans. And so it was this balance of sort of offering people a general history of the archipelago and its people and its diaspora, and more specific sort of themes and topics. And so I think that, for me, having written a history of Puerto Rico from pre-Columbian times to Bad Bunny in 200 pages or less prepared me to write 17 visualizers of short narratives.
The first narrative, or the visualizer as they're called, that I would love to get into is the opening track on the album, which I'm guessing there's some significance there, Nueva York, which I'm looking at the numbers right now online and we're in excess of 38 million. Will you ever write anything more popular as a history professor? Can I get you just to maybe read a little bit of it in Spanish and then translate a little bit of that in English, what the message is that you wanted to get across?
Absolutely. So before I go into the lines, I just want to say that I really enjoyed that Benito put this song first in the record because I think it's an homage to that diasporic Puerto Rican and Caribbean culture in the States and abroad. And so the record doesn't start in San Juan or in Manatí or Vega Baja. It starts in the most Caribbean place in the world, in Nueva York. Nueva York! And so the visualizer, the text, is called La Bandera Puertorriqueña 1895 a 1952. Luego de varios siglos de colonización española, comenzó a surgir un sentimiento. So in this slide, what I wanted to do was to begin by saying that the first time that we are referred to in the colonial record is in a pejorative manner. The Spanish colonial officers were calling us bastards, and how Puerto Ricans have always resignified the pejorative ways that people have addressed us, and also to talk a little bit about the Puerto Rican flag itself and how it was not created in Manatí. It was actually created in New York City. And so it tells the story of the Puerto Rican flag and how it was unveiled in 1895 at the Cuban Revolutionary Party's committee, which had a Puerto Rico section. And so it signified the combined struggle for independence of Cuba and Puerto Rico. And although it was later incorporated by the Puerto Rican government, it was illegal for some time to have the Puerto Rican flag. It has a revolutionary origin, and it has a diasporic origin as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next song I would love for us to get into is the actual album title track, Debí tirar más fotos, which there's also a short video as well. And this is not an original thought, but it was a thought that I had just listening to the album and watching these videos, is the evolution of him as an artist, the evolution of reggaeton, the incorporation of Afro-Caribbean instruments and sound. If we can get a breakdown here as well, that would be great.
Absolutely. So I did not get to decide which text went with which song, but I think that the team did a wonderful and beautiful job merging them together. And one thing I'll say is that this particular slide was something that Benito wanted. He wanted something about the history of plena and bomba, which are these two Afro-Caribbean rhythms, and how they are the basis of reggaeton. De la plena y la bomba al reggaetón 1500 a 1990. La borinqueña, la canción que luego pasará.
El perreo, la salsa, la bomba y la plana. Chequéate la mía, cómo es que suena. Debí tirar más fotos de cuando te tuve. Debí darte más besos y abrazos las veces que pude. Ojalá que lo mío nunca se mude y que tú me envíes más nudes. Y si yo me emborracho, qué bueno me ayuda.
In the ways that bomba and plena are two Afro-Caribbean rhythms that were understood as noise. They were actually police. People were arrested or fined for playing bomba and plena. As close as last year, there was an incident in the southern part of Puerto Rico where the cops were called on people that were playing bomba. And so how it became the basis of reggaeton, sort of to also pay homage to the Afro-Caribbean dimension of reggaeton. Because Benito has talked about, being a white Puerto Rican, but reggaeton in its essence is an Afro-Caribbean rhythm.
Okay, so the last song that I would love for you to break down for me is my favorite song on the album, Baile Inolvidable. I'm guessing it's more than just a heartbreak song or a longing song. So if you could do me the honor of breaking down what this song is going for and what the message is on the visualizers that are accompanying the music.
Absolutely. So Baile Inolvidable, I think it's a great song because although salsa is in the record from the get-go, and throughout the record, I think it was his attempt of playing around with the sounds of salsa while paying tribute to that music that basically raised a lot of us in Puerto Rico. And so in this particular slide, I was talking about the creation of the Commonwealth in Puerto Rico. Estas acciones aspiraban a tomar la atención internacional. Es en este contexto, tanto local como internacional, que el Congreso de los Estados Unidos aprobó la Ley 600, permitiendo a los puertorriqueños crear una nueva forma de gobierno. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with this slide is to heed to Anita's call that a lot of the history that should be general, that should be well known amongst Puerto Ricans is unknown. And so this is talking about the creation of the Puerto Rican Commonwealth in 1952, which is the current political status that we have, but also talking about the agency of Puerto Ricans. You know, we were talking earlier about how we're often infantilized in media. And it goes all the way back to 1898 when the United States invaded Puerto Rico and they produced cartoons of Puerto Ricans as children, as, you know, women in distress. And so it was a way of also talking about the agency that we've had throughout our history. And that contrary to some beliefs, we're not docile, but we are, you know, it's a history of indocility, the history of Puerto Rico.
Thinking about your work and Bad Bunny's work and how those messages in history reach or don't reach Boricuas in Wisconsin, you know, I'm looking at some numbers here that we have in excess of 65,000 here in the state. And I know we've hit on the fact that this history is so unknown and inaccessible. And for a lot of folks, it's just not realistic to get back to the island. So what are the challenges in keeping in touch with what's happening in Puerto Rico at this time? And then what does an album like this do to bridge that gap?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think that is a question that a lot of scholars and non-scholars and Puerto Ricans have been thinking a lot about, precisely because there's more Puerto Ricans in the diaspora than in the archipelago. And in my work, one of the ways that I've sought to address that is that when writing a general history of Puerto Rico, I incorporated the Puerto Rican diaspora as part of the narrative, which is a simple narrative move, but it had not been done previously. Our general history books did not take into consideration the Puerto Rican diaspora. And shout out to all the Puerto Ricans in Wisconsin and all the Latinx community as well, because I'm part of a big Mexican community in Madison. Those are my neighbors, you know, the people that I rock with. But to your point, I think, and to your question, I think that this record is doing something incredible by positioning itself in New York from the first song onwards, because it's a nod and a recognition about the importance of Caribbean and Latina culture, not only in the Caribbean and in Latin America, but also in the United States, right? And it doesn't mean that that struggle is less important than what's happening in Puerto Rico. Yes, what's happening in Puerto Rico is brutal. You know, we go through power outages on an almost daily basis, lack of infrastructure. I guess that this record, what it offers is a way of connecting with a sense of Puerto Ricanness, that sort of affirmation. And, you know, I never understood why Puerto Ricans in the diaspora were so cling to their flag until I got to be a diasporic Puerto Rican 11 years ago. And now I have the flag in my car. I have the flag in my socks. I think that a record like this one seeks to bridge that gap. And it just makes us proud of being who we are, but also acknowledging the challenges and difficulties of our people.
I've heard you call this album a snapshot of the present moment we're in, which, if that's the case, Debí tirar más fotos is the perfect album title. But if it is a snapshot, who is Bad Bunny leaving that snapshot for? And what does he want the island to look like in the future?
You know, I think that in the last few years, Bad Bunny has become more aware of himself as a political actor. and recognize his political agency. This is not new. The first time he appeared on national television, it was in the Tonight Show, and he used that stage to talk about a murder of a trans woman in Puerto Rico. He used the platform he had in El Apagón, that song that he dropped, and then all of a sudden you're watching the video and it becomes a documentary on gentrification, right? So it's not new that he's using his platform. I think it's a snapshot because, we are at a moment where we're being displaced. There's a wealthy class that's being attracted by the government through a series of incentives that makes Puerto Rico a tax haven for millionaires. We are at a moment where rapid gentrification is displacing communities in the island. We're losing our culture. And so I think that Benito is very aware of what's happening, and he's very vocal about it. And I think Debí tirar más fotos. Lo que le pasó a Hawaii, what happened to Hawaii, is another very political song in which he's talking about colonialism, displacement, and gentrification. And so I guess that the future that Benito wants is one where him and his people can stay in Puerto Rico if they so want it and have a decent living.
That was Jorel Melendez-Badillo, a UW-Madison assistant professor of history and author of Puerto Rico, A National History. He spoke to WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez earlier this year. Did you know you can listen to Like Effect as a podcast? Search for Like Effect wherever you get your podcasts to download and listen on demand. Later in the show, we'll learn about Wisconsin's lumberjacking history. But first, we'll talk about what's in store for the annual Milwaukee Comedy Festival happening this week. Keep listening to Like Effect on WUWM.
Ey, el mejor de la nueva porque me crié en la vieja. Gracias a mami y papi por todos los jalos no rea. Nunca me han visto en la calle ni en los podcasts ando queja. Tratan de medir fuerza y no pueden ni en pareja. Calle sol, calle luna, estrella en la noche oscura.
You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Aspiring actor Matt Kemple first came to Milwaukee in 2005. He'd only intended to stay for a year, but 20 years later, he's still here. During that time, he helped build the Milwaukee comedy scene, including through his work creating and running the annual Milwaukee Comedy Festival. The festival, now in its 20th year, kicks off today and runs through Sunday. Kemple was featured in a Milwaukee Record article in July, recounting his evolution from performer to producer. Kemple joined WUWM's Rachel Owens to talk about his 20 years of making Milwaukee a funnier place.
Now, you came originally to Milwaukee aspiring to be an actor, right?
Yeah.
So how did it evolve into being a comedy producer?
A lot of it came from the acting world. I got very involved in set building and lighting and sound design, that I got really involved with the back end of things. And that was actually how I was able to support my acting career at the time. I wasn't making any money as an actor, maybe a couple $100 for a month's worth of work. But I could make that in a week just from doing a set building or helping with the lighting design or getting up on a ladder and a wrench and, all kinds of stuff. So the more that I did that, the more that I became the person in the room that people would look to. Hey, we don't know how to do this thing. Matt, you've done this before, you do it. And no joke, that's basically how I became a producer, is I just happened to be the one that, knew how to turn the lights on. So comedy was this side project that I was doing while I was trying to focus on being a really serious professional in the theater world. And the more I realized what I was doing is that I was really building this comedy scene, which didn't exist very much in the past. And again, I was just motivated because I saw creativity in other people, and I was like, well, this is fun for me. Let me just help you guys do this thing. And I got involved in comedy, just helping on the sidelines, helping run the lights and sound for comedy shows. So it started little by little, and then all of a sudden it was turning into this, hey, there's all this comedy in town. We got to figure out a way to get all these people together and just do some big show. And that's how the Milwaukee Comedy Festival started, was a bunch of us in a room wanting to create art and be funny at creating that art. And everybody kind of twiddling their thumbs, wondering, well, how do we do this? And it was like, oh, you know what? Let's just put a big show on. It seemed so easy at the time to just say that and do it. And I didn't know it was going to be a huge amount of work in this thing that I would continue to do for 20 years. It was just a one-off thing. We called it the first annual Sketch and Improv Festival, and I thought that was hilarious to call it the first annual. And, you know, what better way to bring joy to a group of people than with comedy?
Yeah, so we are celebrating 20 years of the Milwaukee Comedy Festival. Give us a little preview what's coming up for this fall.
Sure. This year, I am ecstatic about our headliners and the venues and everything that we're going to be in. As some of the listeners know, I run the Laughing Top Comedy Club as well with my partners, Caitlin and Greg. And we closed the club down on purpose this summer in order to focus our efforts on opening a new venue. That venue won't be ready for the Comedy Fest, but that was also sort of by design. So this year we have an incredible lineup of comics, the biggest being Patton Oswalt, who is one of my personal favorites and just somebody that would be a dream to work with. The voice of Ratatouille, and he's been on Name Your Favorite sitcom in the last couple of years, and he has probably had a cameo on there. Parks and Rec is a good one. He played a townsperson in Parks and Rec that did a filibuster and talked about the Mandalorian movie before it came out. And you can look this up. They actually took his improvised monologue from that television show, and that they based the opening scene of that on what he said. Yeah, Patton Oswalt is an incredibly talented comedian, actor, writer. He's done some really amazing things. So for us to be able to produce a show with him at the Pabst Theater is a dream come true. But we will be at Lakefront Brewery for the kickoff event this year on Tuesday, October 7th with Aparna Nancherla. And then we have the incredible Sean Patton, a different Patton, at the Cooperage on Wednesday, October 8th. I mentioned Patton Oswalt on that Thursday. And then that Friday, we're going to be at Shank Hall with Punky Johnson from Saturday Night Live and Comedy Central and a bunch of other things, very funny. And then Saturday, we're going to be at Comedy Sports in the Garage Space, which is fun. And then we're going to close out at Great Lakes Distillery. We're going to be doing 2 shows. Should be a really phenomenal fest this year. I'm very excited.
And you must have a unique perspective on how comedians are being received by Milwaukee audiences, and also what might be unique to Milwaukee or Wisconsin comedy. So what do you think makes Milwaukee audiences and comedians special?
I think part of it goes back to sort of what I mentioned previously about myself. There is this level of creativity and excitement that people have in this city, and I think it's because we are a smaller, mid-sized city, and especially comedy. We're right next to one of the largest comedy markets in the world, which is Chicago. Chicago and New York are 2 of the largest comedy scenes in the world, but depending on what style of comedy, Chicago reigns more than New York in some ways. So to me, a Milwaukee comic, it's interesting because a lot of them, to get to the level that they are at, they have worked in Chicago. They have to do shows in Rhinelander and Cedarburg and Madison and Mequon and a lot of different places. And those are very different audiences. And that's something that's amazing about a Milwaukee comic, is that they have worked all those rooms and they have the ability to be funny to a very large number of people because they've had really good sets in those rooms. They've probably had really bad sets in those rooms. And you don't always get that from other cities. There's all those tiny little things that make Milwaukee a little bit different. And I think that's why you're going to get a unique flavor in the festival, not just because we have comics from all over, but because we have this incredible talent pool here in the city already.
And from that Milwaukee Record article, there was a quote from a Milwaukee comedian, AJ Grill.
One of my favorites in town, and a very funny guy who is one of those that I mentioned. He has done every sized room you can imagine. AJ has done shows for 5 people. He's done shows for 500 people. He's done shows even bigger than that. He is dedicated to what he does, and he's always trying to write new jokes. At least when I see him, that's how it comes off. So nice job, AJ, if you're if you're faking it. But he's doing great.
Well, and he returns the compliment because he was saying that Milwaukee would be a very different scene without the work that you've done for 20 years. I'm paraphrasing here. And he says that part of the reason that he never left the Milwaukee scene was because of the consistent work that he could get that you were providing and Milwaukee Comedy were providing. So how does that feel to know that you've helped a comedian make it as a profession here?
You know, you'll have to tell me, I think I'm blushing. Truly, I take that as a huge compliment. I do not take that statement lightly. That has always been the goal, I think, from the beginning, is let's create this scene that the rooms are full of people that want to laugh and the comics want to be there performing. And when it clicks, it clicks. When you have a room full of people that love to be there and love laughing, and you have a comic that's able to embrace that energy and that attitude, amazing things happen. And so that was always the goal. But for me to sit here and be told that I met that goal, that's an honor to hear. It's very humbling to hear, because to me, the work is never done. I don't see what I've accomplished as much as what I want to accomplish. I'm sitting here thinking about that new venue that we're hoping to open. I'm thinking about this comedy festival that hasn't happened yet. We've already booked these incredible talents. That's not even close to half the work that has to be done. We have to sell tickets to all those shows, and we can't just sell tickets to these shows and hope people show up. They have to be good shows. They have to be well run. They have to be quality venues and quality experiences for the people that come. So again, to hear that is something that I have already accomplished that's an amazing thing to hear, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to accept that.
We'll try. Well,
So thanks, AJ.
Yeah, and congratulations. Thank you for the 20 years and making Milwaukee a funnier place and a more enjoyable place to live. Thank you so much for joining me, Matt Kempel, and congratulations on 20 years of the Comedy Festival and of being the comedy producer to go to here in Milwaukee.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
That was Matt Kempel, founder and executive producer of the Milwaukee Comedy Festival. He spoke with WUWM's Rachel Owens. The festival kicks off today and runs through Sunday, October 12th. You can find more information and purchase tickets at mkecomedyfest.com. Soon we'll take a trip to the beach to learn how to look for beach glass. But first, we'll talk about the world of timber sports and its connection to northern Wisconsin. Keep listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Northern Wisconsin is home to the Lumberjack World Championships, which takes place every summer in Hayward. To find out more about the history of logging in the Northwoods and how women have become more frequent competitors in timber sports, WUWM's Mayan Silver spoke with historian Willa Hammett Brown. Brown is the author of the book Gentlemen in the Woods: Manhood, Myth, and the American Lumberjack.
It was part of a whole hardwood forest, the old white pine forest that covered the UP of Michigan and the upper part of the Mitten, then through that sweep of Wisconsin and the northern part of Minnesota as well. A huge piece of timberland. And the logging of that land was the single biggest real transformation of American landscape, one of the biggest transformations in American history. It was the height of lumbering when that part of the land was lumbered in the 1880s through about the 1910s. And it really is what allowed the Midwest to flourish. Chicago, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Omaha, all of these cities are built with Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan Northwoods white pine. Hayward itself was actually kind of famous. It was one of, each state had a few of these wild towns that really could be compared to what we think of as Western cow towns. In fact, there have been studies done that the logging towns of the upper Midwest had higher crime rates and violence than the sort of famous old Wild West towns. And Hayward was one of Wisconsin's famous dens of iniquity, which is why it's very cool that it's where they now do the Lumberjack World Championships. It feels incredibly apt that they would come back home to Hayward. It was a remarkable time that has been sort of lost to history on purpose, because in many ways, there's a great quote I love from a woman who watched this herself, who was the daughter of a lumber camp owner, who referred to the logging of the upper Midwest as an epic and a tragedy. And it was epic in scale, and it was tragic in outcomes. So we celebrate parts of it. We celebrate this sort of mythical, made-up idea of what a lumberjack was about, and we very purposefully forget other parts of it about environmental destruction, poverty, fire, and all the other side effects that were really fairly tragic, particularly in Wisconsin, actually.
Logging and lumberjacking was a traditionally male-dominated profession. What was the role and history of women in this industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really was an extremely male profession, to the point where women were banned in most camps. Women were seen as possible distractions and possible ways of tearing apart the camps. Towards the end of the 19th century, you've got these camps of 80 to 150 men working together. And so drinking, gambling, and women are banned and seen as ways to lower morale. In smaller camps, women would be employed, and even in some big camps, in the cook shack. Often in very small camps, that would just mean the foreman's wife was the cook. But there were cooks and cookies who were, cookies being a cook's assistant, who were women who were hired. The real largest group of women to follow the lumberjack trade were sex workers and prostitutes. There were brothels across the upper Midwest. A lot of these small towns would be, I'm thinking of Seney, Michigan, a town that out of season had a population of 400, but had 7 brothels, I believe. So it's not the 200 men of that town who are keeping 7 brothels going. It's lumberjacks who are doing that. And you really didn't see women even in the summer. The spaces men were in were very male dominated. These taverns were very male places, and the few women who were in them would either be the daughters of tavern owners who would be working, or these sort of notorious women along the style of, if you think of like a Calamity Jane in the West. So they're really, the opening up of lumbering to women is an extremely modern phenomenon.
You're tuned into Lake Effect. I'm WEWM's Maayan Silver, speaking with Willa Hammett-Brown, historian, speaker, and writer. We are talking about women in lumberjacking, and you said it really wasn't a thing until modern times. Before that, I want a little nugget about how lumberjacking became timber sports, or, that kind of competitive lumberjacking.
Of course. It's a really interesting story, because it's also the story of how we changed what we think of as lumberjacking. So logging still happens, obviously. Forestry is still a big industry in this country. But right today, it requires much more specialized knowledge of machinery than it does of shimmying up logs or log burling. That's the log rolling in a river. Those skills are attached to a largely dead form of the industry. They're attached to a sort of nostalgic late 19th, early 20th century idea of what lumbering was, and the way lumbering happened in the upper Midwest, in the Northwoods, in these winter camps where these skills were really prized. There were some competitions that began while lumbering still existed. We have burling competitions happening in the late 19th century around in Michigan and Minnesota. And some of those were actual lumberjacks sort of showing off in the summer, and there started being money made out of that. But it really takes off when we get the full-blown nostalgia for the old, ye olde lumberjacky. And that nostalgia bears very little resemblance to the actual industry. So after the industry left in the 1920s, the Northwoods were just totally devastated. The largest fire in American history was the Peshtigo fire, which was one of the deadliest fires as well, may have killed up to 1,200 people. you get these fires just devastating huge swaths of landscape. And in Wisconsin in particular, in the 1930s, there was actually a second Dust Bowl that no one talks about, which was in the cutover region of northern Wisconsin, the area we're talking about. So you have these economically devastated regions, also damaged by fire. There's not a lot that's easy to recover industry-wise around there because pine grows in sandy soil, and sandy soil doesn't make for great farming soil. So what the region turns to is tourism as a way to recover. And, still, if you've ever spent a beautiful weekend at the Apostle Islands, you know that northern Wisconsin is a lovely place to go as a tourist. And at the same time that region is turning to tourism, there's also sort of a national nostalgia for the closing of the West and a national nostalgia for what is seen as these sort of true white heroes of the West, the cowboys, the lumberjacks, your Johnny Appleseeds. And a lot of this has to do with just changing ideas of what it is to be a man in modern society. It has much more to do with factory work or office work. You're not out there doing things. And so there becomes a lot of nostalgia for that work. And by the 1930s and 40s, there start being these fairs with reenactments. And that's where you start seeing timber sports really take off, is it's a celebration of really raw masculine strength and skill. It doesn't really bear a resemblance to the actual industry, which was a pretty standard industry in late 19th century terms, which is to say poor workers with very little way up, really bad conditions, terrible wages. It was a real industrial scale extractive industry. But what we celebrate about it is a sort of smaller scale folksy interpretation of that.
Gotcha. Okay. And so then how we were talking about this modern trail of women into this. What about women into timber sports? Like, how did that start?
My understanding is that it started 20 or 30 years ago, but really took off in the last sort of 20 years. I think part of the thing about lumber sports and timber sports is they are so distinctly masculine, in that they are this nostalgic exercise in showing the skills of an all-male industry. And all of the nostalgia is for this sort of mythologized and deeply problematic, but whatever, image of the white frontier male hero. And I just love that women have taken to going into that space and showing that they can hold space there. It's going into the most male-coded space you could possibly find and showing that you can do it, which I find incredible and I think speaks a lot to the appeal to women, is that there are all sorts of places you can compete, but to choose to compete on grounds that are so tied up with our ideas of what it is to be a man is awesome.
Willa Brown, thank you so much for speaking about lumberjacking, the history of it, and women in the sport. It's been very interesting.
Thank you so much for having me.
On the wild and windy shores of old Superior.
Willa Hammett Brown is a historian and the author of Gentlemen in the Woods, Manhood, Myth, and the American Lumberjack. She spoke with WUWM's Maayan Silver in July.
We're calloused hands and weathered skin and iron to the core. Way, hey, another brand new day on the wild and windy shores of old Superior.
As the summer-like weather winds down for now, we're taking a final trip to the beach to look for a treasure hiding in plain sight. Blythe Haney hunts for beach glass along the freshwater shorelines of southeast Wisconsin. She spoke with Lake Effect's Excrit Nunez about beach glass and how to find it.
Blythe, you've been beach glass hunting for about 12 years now. Can you tell me what beach glass is and how it's formed?
So beach glass comes from the beach, from the lake, normally called sea glass if it's from the ocean or the sea, but it is essentially discarded old bottles or glassware that have broken in the water or before they get to the water, and then smoothed out and sanded down by the sand and the waves over 20, 30, 40, 50 years and wash up on the shore. And now they're these beautiful, smooth, and not dangerous pieces.
How does the glass you usually find end up in the water in the first place?
Yeah, so sometimes from shipwrecks, from glassware from shipwrecks in any sort of capacity. Also, it was very popular for old like dumping sites to be along like lakefronts. So like especially Milwaukee, like along the bluffs and stuff. And then when those start eroding into the water, it's just inevitable that that's going to go into the lake, unfortunately. I've also read that people back in the day, if they lived along like a lakeside or body of water type of community, they would just discard their trash straight into the lake because it would just be gone. They wouldn't see it. So unfortunately, but then we get to discover it years and years later.
And I'm curious, how did you become interested in beach glass hunting and what do you love about it?
Kind of funny story. So I knew nothing about it until I was in high school. It was with my high school boyfriend, and he took me to one of his favorite fishing spots. And he showed me like, hey, look at this cool like beach glass. I see it every time I come here. I'm like, what the heck? I've never seen this before. And ever since then, I've been collecting. I think at first I was really drawn to obviously the beauty of it. But then over time of collecting, I'm like, wow, there's actually like history behind these pieces. And I think that's really special too, like getting to know like, oh, like not everything is made out of glass bottles like it used to be back in the day. And I just think that behind it is really cool.
Yeah. When I think about beach glass hunting, all I can wonder about is where certain pieces of glass come from. Do you ever try to find out when you find a new piece of glass?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts. And a couple of years ago, I actually started like a little mini series on my social media where if I find a piece and it's the pattern on it or the words on it are more distinguishable than others. Some don't have any of that, but some, like for example, I found a very, very dark blue piece and it said the word vapor on it. So I was like, okay, this is from a Vicks Vapor Rub, like bottle. Yeah, so that was obviously super cool. And then I'll show that on social media and be like, this is what it used to be and this is what I found on the beach. So
wow.
Yeah, it's fun to identify or try to identify the best I can.
What are some other neat pieces that you found that stand out to you?
The first ones that come to mind, I have found a really small, I would say like dime size porcelain glass doll head. And it was all white and I picked it up and it's just the head. It was really small. And then a couple weeks later in the same area, found an arm, like a porcelain glass doll arm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Those are really fun pieces to find because a lot of those, that Chinaware and stuff will have those really pretty blue patterns or pink patterns on them. And those are fun to, I think, even more rare to find than the glass. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And what do you do with the beach glass that you find? You said that you collect a lot of it.
Yeah, I used to just have jars and jars and jars of it. And over time, like I would say after about 4 or 5 years of collecting, I was like, I gotta do something with this. I mean, it was beautiful to look at, but I wanted to kind of turn it into something wearable and something other people could maybe appreciate for themselves. So I started also making jewelry. Besides like the jewelry making, I like to try to get creative and make like home decor and home artwork as well. So like making mosaics out of the beach glass pieces because people make mosaics out of regular glass. So why not? Yeah, I guess the possibilities are kind of endless. It's just a matter of like how creative can you get with it?
Yeah, and how much you find.
Yeah, sure exactly.
And would you say there's a beach glass hunting community in Milwaukee or like the southeast Wisconsin area?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it lies more in like the lake itself, like Lake Michigan. So like on Facebook, there's like Lake Michigan beach glass groups and very welcoming and not like in my eyes, not like competitive in any sort of way. We're all looking for the same thing out there, but it's very much so like, oh, look at what I got from this beach and look at the cool pieces I found at this beach. And people are very open and excited for each other in that sense. So yeah, I think there's definitely a community and it's very welcoming.
Like they hype each other up.
Right. And that's what we need these days.
And are there any popular spots you'd recommend people to visit?
Yeah, so I am from Racine, and one of my favorite spots is over by Gateway Technical College. And that's right along the lake there. There's a really pretty beach area. Also, one of my favorite spots, also in Racine, is Carrie Hogle Park. So it's at the end of like Main Street area. It's a very small beach, so you're going to go and be like, I'm not going to find anything here. But it provides like really beautiful pieces rather than just like your clears and kind of your more basic colors. If you find any, it's going to be like some really pretty blues and stuff like that.
And for someone who hasn't gone searching for beach glass before, is there a best time of day or year to visit?
In my experience, it seems like early spring is a really good time to go. If you can go in the winter, go in the winter, as long as it's not like the lake's not frozen and stagnant, not pushing anything up. And also, time of day, I would say early morning, but when it comes to weather, definitely after storms and tides are low, it's really helpful. Storms will push everything up on the beach, tides go down, and you've got all these pretty pieces showing up.
Well, Blythe, I've loved chatting with you. And so now, how about we head out and look for some beach glass together?
Yeah, I'm so excited. Let's do it. We are at Grant Park Beach right now. It is 6 in the morning. Beautiful sunrise going on, and it's just really calm waters. Really great conditions to be out here looking for beach glass. I'm actually seeing a lot. There must have been some sort of good tides lately or something that's bringing up a lot of beach glass. It's mostly clear, but I mean, beach glass is beach glass. When I'm looking along the beach, I'm kind of just looking, obviously there's a whole bunch of rocks and sand, but I'm kind of looking for the pieces that stand out that are a little bit more shiny, catch my eye, maybe a little bit colorful. Those are usually pieces of beach glass. It just draws your eye, especially when the sun is hitting it just right, so the sunrise is super helpful this morning. Here's a pretty big clear piece. Not super exciting, but still really cool. I want to find some greens or blues.
What could clear pieces be from?
Clear pieces often from like, even just like soda bottles, maybe some basic like perfume bottles or medicine bottles when they used to come in more glass bottles back in the day. It's pretty universal. Here's a brown piece, first colorful piece this morning. It's small, but she's mighty. Oh wait, this one's kind of blue when you put it with the clears. It looked clear kind of by itself, but when you put it with the other clears, it looks light blue. So that's a nice surprise.
Is this a piece of glass?
Oh yeah, that's a little brown one. Good catch. The brown ones are sometimes hard because they mix in well with the rocks. But if you see it glistening, that's a good tell that it's glass. So if I'm on a beach that has a lot of rocks, like a lot of pebbles in the sand, it's not just sand, but more rocky little pebbles, I'll kind of stand in one spot and kind of move my foot along the top of the rocks, kind of shuffle it around because I don't know, you know that some pieces of glass could hide in there, get covered over time. So I'm just kind of trying to see if I can uncover any of those. Oh yeah, see, I just did it. Okay, so now, really cool. These are one of my favorite colors, a dark blue piece. It's really small, but I shuffled some of the rocks around just standing in one place with my foot, and I got a tiny little dark blue piece. Probably too small to make jewelry out of, but still cool for my collection.
I just feel like it's kind of sweet to think, like, there's just so many treasures, like, that the water brings up that we have no idea that's in there.
I know, like, let alone all these beautiful rocks, but then there's just, like, these little pieces of history coming up, too, like, with the glass and stuff. It's so cool.
I could see why you do this.
Yeah. I think I've now converted you into a beach glass hunter. I feel like the tide is coming up higher and higher as the day goes on.
Can you tell me or show me like what we found today? Can you describe to listeners what treasures we found?
Let me pull our stash out of my pocket here. So we've got a good amount of clear pieces. Our biggest piece is a clear piece, and it's wonderful shape, wonderful size, maybe a necklace or something in the future. Got a couple brown pieces, more maybe dime size, a little smaller but still great. And then we have a little bit of smaller pieces, which are the greens and blues that we found. They're smaller, but they're still beautiful and colorful. So I'd say we probably have about 15, 20 pieces here. Pretty good haul for like 45 minutes or so, I would say.
Blythe Haney is a beach glass hunter and jewelry artist from Racine. She spoke with Lake Effect's ex-Grit Nunez in August. They went beach glass hunting at Grand Park Beach. And that's all for today's Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect from this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll hear from some Green Bay Packers fans who live across the world in Japan. They're featured in a documentary coming to theaters this month. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.